Boom, back with another one. Yo, alright, so I see my guy All Father Silver just dropped a new video, and when I saw what the video was, I was like, yo, we gonna before we even watch this, we just gonna do straight up first reaction to a type vibe, and this is probably one of them fights like the Goku versus Frieza fight, the Naruto versus might as well say Sasuke fight, like Ichigo versus Aizen, like no, Ichigo versus Grim Jiao. Yeah, yeah, yeah. One of those type of fights, like, and like I said, I like bro's breakdowns of these fights. I like the facts that he shared and all the panels he used and everything. And again, I like the way he go over everything. We're gonna watch it, and then we're gonna give our take on it at the end of it. So let's get into it.
Rob Lucci versus Luffy. And this fight is a little bit interesting because Lucci is a pretty underrated character. So I wanted to come in here and just explain what transpired to the best of my ability. Now the cool thing about this is that early in Egghead, Rob Lucci did not view Luffy as an emperor. The reason I say that's important is because by the end of all this, when he does fight Zoro, he has changed his mind and now he does recognize Luffy as an emperor, as he views beating Zoro, the number 2 of an emperor, a nice consolation prize, right? So I think that that's a really cool concept that's like Lucci saw firsthand what Luffy was capable of and now is willing to give him the respect. But alas, we go on. This fight starts after Lucci, Six King Pistols, Atlas, and Luffy wants to fight him because she made sure him and his crew were fed. We see that Lucci got his new transformation, his awakened leopard form, and he told Luffy, newsflash, you're not the only one who's gotten stronger, after Luffy, of course, entered his own awakened form of Gear 5. Now, this fight served a couple purposes, one of which was to let Vegapunk give some explanation to the Straw Hats on the Warrior in White or Nika.
I definitely feel like Lucci was definitely overrated, like especially at this point.
Now Luffy was laughing
because everybody was still riding the wave of like Luffy beating Kaido.
Now when he did this,
I feel like they was really underplaying this nigga Rob Lucci.
Even while he was quote-unquote off guard because he wasn't expecting Lucci to close the distance that fast, he easily reacts and dodges all Lucci's strikes. It even goes so far as to show Luffy effectively sleeping as he dodges them. Now, I don't think he was literally sleeping. It's just part of the gag of Gear 5, him dodging on these attacks, but it shows a clear speed gap between the two of them. Now, after this, both Luffy and Lucci load back a huge punch, and they actually meet in the middle evenly. Now, there's a couple things that go into this. Obviously, we just saw Luffy is much faster than Lucci, so this does seem like an outlier by those respects that, you know, Lucci is...
I mean, I feel like it was clear. I don't think he's on par. I don't think he was on par. Hold up. I don't think he was on par. The reason I don't think he was on par, again, for Luffy at this point, he ain't worried about this nigga even being able to get to Robin or accomplish what it is he trying because he know he can handle it. So it's like during this fight, it felt like Luffy was really just showing off like how extra he can be with Gear 5, like being disrespectful to this nigga Rob Lucci and then putting him in his place when he did. Cause like, yeah, nah. Like even with the fight versus Kizaru, I would say there's a clear difference in the way Luffy's kind of trying to handle the situation. And even with the extent at which he's going to kind of show his skill and his growth, like one, because of who Kizaru is and what he did to his crew. But it's like, Luffy don't upgrade it. So it's like, gotta prove a point to you. I ain't no little boy to be like stepped on no more. Same thing in this. Rob Lucci had, honestly, if you ask me, Rob Lucci had Luffy beat. But like, again, hearing that homeboy, hearing Usopp in the back of it, and hearing Usopp, boy, that did it. And it's like, at this point, Luffy don't need that, bro. He's just that guy. Like, he done got to a point where he can handle it. And it shows. But we don't,
yeah. Direct callback to their initial fight, the Great Fight from Enies Lobby, where they do the exact same thing. Now, even though that it does seem that this is something of an outlier, especially as we continue on, we have to take it at face value, at least in some respects. The one thing that I will say is that I'm not going to really get into the nuances of every version of hockey because Oda is very inconsistent and hasn't clarified it. I think what's most likely is that Luffy's simply using armament haki here, which wouldn't be a bad look for Lucci regardless, because we know that if somebody's armament haki is much stronger than the others, case in point being Luffy and Katakuri at one point, you will hurt yourself punching their armament
I
haki.
mean,
That does
fair
not
point.
happen for Lucci here, which tells you that his armament haki is at least in a relative tier of Luffy's in its base form.
That's
Because
a
the
fair
punches
that's
are
a fair
equal,
point.
they both get sent flying an equal distance backward. We can actually see the impact of both of them being sent flying back.
Yeah,
do
I
think
can't
that it
argue
also
with that.
looks as if, because we obviously just saw that Luffy could dodge any punch Lucci throws, that Luffy probably wanted to clash fists with him here. But alas, as I mentioned, this is something of an outlier. We'll continue. After this, we see Luffy get up very fast. He jumps into the sky. We cut away for a brief instant, to which Luffy and Lucci are now both on the ground, and Luffy uses Gum Gum Mole Pistol. Now, the truth about this is Lucci has no idea about the nature of Gear 5, so he's not actually understanding what is truly going to take place. So you could theoretically argue an off guard here, considering he's not expecting Luffy to be able to punch a hole through the ground that's going to come up and then punch him in the stomach. We really don't get to see what his face looked like before this. All we see is the aftermath of the punch landing on him, which it does land clean. I wouldn't really hold this against Lucci though, as I said, because again, this is something that effectively is so well out of the bounds of like what is normal. It can land on characters regardless if they're relative or not. A great example of this is like when Queen used his Brachiosaurus technique, where he like shoots his head out of his body and it like coils around Sanji. We know Sanji is much faster than Queen, yet just the sheer shock of this ability allowed for this attack to land on him. So these things can transpire in this way. After this, Lucci gets knocked back, and Luffy loses focus, and he starts talking with Sentomaru. Says, "Long time no see." Sentomaru's like, "Don't call me by that name. We're enemies," because Luffy called him Axe Boy. And this is basically kind of what stems Sentomaru, like wanting to protect Vegapunk, all that shit. But what it leads to is Lucci coming in and slamming into Sentomaru. Now, it is a case where obviously Luffy has even his eyes closed here. He's obviously not focused on Lucci. He doesn't really view him as a great threat. But the fact that Lucci does land this attack in front of Luffy is semi of note. He lands his hand pistol on Sentomaru. And one thing some people like to talk about is like Sentomaru's dialogue in the next chapter, where he talks about like how he saw it coming at the last second and he thought he blocked it. It's not as if Lucci just went through Sentomaru's defense here. He went underneath it and he scooped up. So he just went around Sentomaru. He was too fast for him. Sentomaru did notice it, which is kind of underrated, but he put his guard way too high for where Lucci ended up striking. But this is what I mean about Oda being so inconsistent with shit. It's like, if Sentomaru could notice this while he was distracted in conversation with Luffy, like, why did Luffy not notice it? And like Luffy didn't intervene. That's just what Oda does sometimes. It's a little bit weird. I assume that's why he went out of his way to make Luffy close his eyes, but even with his eyes closed, he should have still sensed it.
I was gonna say
But
that, like with
Oda
observation
didn't notice
hockey.
that Sentomaru tried blocking it as well, as Sentomaru was at least surmising. So I guess Oda just chalked it up to Luffy having his eyes closed. Lucci drops Sentomaru. Luffy screams out.
And I would say it's more so carelessness because he's having fun with the fight.
On Sentomaru because he wasn't unconscious. He needed him to give up his superior position in the authority hierarchy so he could control the Seraphim, Best Pieces, all these different shit. Now, when he goes for the second attack on Sentomaru, Luffy actually lands a second attack called Dawn Whip. Now, again, just as I mentioned with the Mole Pistol, you could kind of discredit. This attack you can definitely discredit because Lucci is completely focused on attacking Sentomaru, and thus he is effectively not focused on defending against Luffy, and you could also argue a distraction, right? Now the gum whip hits him, and we cut away from the battle for a minute. When we return to the battle, we see Lucci emerging out of the rubble, to which he was turned into something of a gag when he went through the wall. This kind of just plays on Luffy's Toon Force effects, and he gets back up. Now at this point, Lucci still has it in his mind to target Sentomaru. So it's not even really like he's straight up targeting Luffy or attempting to fight Luffy. His priority here is to take out Sentomaru because, like I said, he wants to get the Seraphim under their control. Now, it's an interesting tactic, obviously, because you obviously have your biggest threat right in front of you, but maybe he deems that if he can get Sentomaru unconscious, he can use the Seraphim to help him fight against Luffy. So it's not the dumbest thing, especially if he already had kind of seen that, you know, Luffy's looking like he's stronger than him. He uses Shave, and at this point, Luffy reacts seemingly coming out of the ground or coming out of nowhere in his giant form, with his giant head at least, and he tries to bite Lucci, to which Lucci reacts and dodges out of the way of the attack. He darts up into the sky, to which Luffy, who basically tried biting Lucci, got a big chunk of the ground into his mouth and starts shooting out blocks up at Lucci, to which Lucci reacts to all these. he starts breaking the rubble around him. Now the thing here is that even with this attack now, this final attack, this is the attack that's going to end up ending this fight. Luffy had gone from the ground to behind Lucci, so some would argue that this is a blitz, but you could still